Listen closely. She gave him a daughter when he demanded a son. She gave him loyalty when he offered her a throne built on bones. She gave him her future. And he repaid her with a sword. On the morning of May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, the woman Henry VIII once swore he would tear the world apart to marry, knelt on cold stone, hands trembling not from fear, but from the knowledge that love can be a death sentence. Tonight, we enter the chambers of a king whose heart was darker than any dungeon, and follow the footsteps of a queen walking toward her own execution. The moonlight trembled on the River Thames, as if the water itself feared what was coming. Inside the grand halls of Whitehall Palace, tension clung to the air like smoke from a candle that refuses to go out. Anne Boleyn stood before the king, a woman who was never meant to wear a crown. Her heartbeat thudded beneath layers of velvet and pearls. She could feel eyes boring into her back. Courtiers, bishops' enemies waiting for her to stumble. She inhaled, and the scent of burning beeswax filled her lungs. She exhaled, and a kingdom began to crack. When Henry VIII first saw her, she was not the most beautiful woman in the court, but beauty is not always powerful. Desire is. Anne had eyes like secrets, half smiles drenched in possibility, words dipped in honey and iron. She refused him. Kings are not meant to hear no, especially not from a woman without a crown. That refusal set the world on fire. Henry was already married to Catherine of Aragon, a queen beloved by the people and by God's own church. But Catherine gave him only one surviving child, a daughter. A princess could never be a son. Henry's fear gnawed at him at night. Fear of death, fear of God's judgment, fear that his name would fade. Anne saw that fear. She fed it softly. "You deserve a male heir," she whispered against the king's ear. Her words wrapped around his heart like vines around stone, tightening and tightening. Soon the king's conscience was no match for his hunger. He promised Anne the world, a throne, a destiny, a crown forged from scandal. But first a marriage had to be destroyed. Cardinals and councils scrambled to prevent catastrophe. If Henry divorced Catherine, it would defy the Pope and fracture the very foundation of faith. Yet Henry insisted that God cursed his marriage, punishing him for marrying his brother's widow. The Pope refused his plea, so Henry made a decision that would bleed into centuries. If God did not agree, he would change God. The Church of England was born out of a king's lust and fear. Cathedrals shook from Rome to London. Priests who opposed him vanished into the Tower. Henry ripped England away from heaven just to place Anne Boleyn beside him on earth. History would never forgive this love story, but love did not ask forgiveness. Anne entered the palace not as a temptress, but as a queen molded from ambition. Her coronation was loud, but her steps were quiet. She remembered every woman Henry once loved. She remembered the way Catherine's sorrow echoed through the halls, and she swore not to share that fate. She laid a hand over her stomach. A child kicked back a son. It must be a son. For the first time, Anne felt the weight of her crown. It did not sit on her head. It pressed on her womb. The night before her marriage, she stood alone in the chapel, lit only by trembling flames. She knelt on cold stone and whispered to the shadows, "Please, do not let me be wrong, but prayers have a way of twisting. Sometimes heaven listens, sometimes hell answers." Henry gave her everything: the title Queen Anne, jewels that glittered like stolen stars, a bed of silk where love was a weapon and hope was a trap. He devoured her kisses like a starving man. She drank his promises like poisoned wine. They were a king and queen, wrapped in silk and sins. She believed they were unstoppable. She believed that if the world hated her, Henry loved her enough to defy fate itself. She didn't yet know. Love that destroys a kingdom cannot survive its collapse. Whispers followed her every step. She stole the throne. She bewitched him. She is cursed. Anne smiled anyway. Smiles are armor when daggers hide behind silk words, but jealousy is sharper than any blade. Noblewomen glared as she passed. Catherine's loyalists spat prayers of vengeance. Even commoners called her the concubine queen. Anne let their hatred feed her. Pride. She had risen from a lady-in-waiting to the highest throne in England. She would birth the heir that Catherine never could. Then they would kill all of them. The child stirred again. Anne pressed her palm harder against her belly. A son. It had to be a son. She closed her eyes and imagined Henry's face, illumined with pride. Finally whole, the baby kicked once more, then went still. A cold shiver crawled up her spine. She clutched the nearest wall. A sudden, sharp pain sliced through her stomach. She gasped, but no one heard. Silence swallowed her scream as she collapsed onto the chapel floor. When she woke, the midwife's eyes were wide with fear. Henry stood nearby, not touching her, not speaking. She looked down. Blood like shattered rubies stained the sheets. Her hands trembled as the truth struck. She had lost the son, the future. The promise, the only reason Henry had torn heaven apart. She cried out and the palace listened, not out of sympathy, out of anticipation. A queen who brings misfortune is a queen who can be replaced. Henry turned away, closing a door she would never open again. Anne reached for him. "My love." Her voice cracked. He did not look back. That was the moment she realized this story was no longer a love story. It was a countdown. The bells of the chapel chimed as if tolling her fate in advance. Anne pressed a trembling hand to her lips to stifle the sob. The crown on her head felt heavier than the sword waiting in her future. Tonight, she was still queen, but the kingdom already smelled her fear. Jealousy is a crowd, and Anne Boleyn stood at its center. She could feel the hatred long before she heard it. Eyes, thousands of them, piercing through the veil of her status, searching for cracks. When she walked through the courtyard, the air chilled around her, as if every breath wished to turn into frost. Court ladies whispered behind their fans decorated with painted angels who looked more merciful than their owners. Anne smiled anyway, but she could taste the bitterness in the breeze. The first months of her reign were supposed to be triumphant. She was crowned at Westminster Abbey in gold and pearls. Carried on a litter like a goddess, the people refused to weigh. Worship streets once filled with cheers for Queen Catherine now echoed with curses for Queen Anne, witch, usurper, whore. Their voices were an anthem of vengeance. She gripped her crown as though fear might knock it loose. But crowns are not held by fingers. They are held by heirs, and she still had none. In the privacy of her chamber, Anne counted the seconds of every day with the rhythm of her heartbeat. Her body was expected to produce salvation. Weight of England sat on her womb like a stone, statue too heavy to move. Every meal tasted like duty, every prayer like negotiation. She pressed a hand over her stomach every morning, praying for movement, praying for a son. She tried to distract the court. Lavish balls, music swelling against vaulted ceilings, pearls glittering in the torchlight like captured stars. She danced while the nobles glared. Her laughter dripped onto the marble like spilled wine. But joy is a luxury envy cannot tolerate. Even her beauty became a crime. Whenever she smiled, someone bled. Jane Seymour first appeared like a gentle shadow, soft-spoken, pale as candle wax. Eyes lowered in perfect obedience. Anne noticed the king's gaze linger too long on that obedience. Jane reminded Henry of quiet nights before storms had names. One evening, Anne rounded a corner and saw Henry holding Jane's hand, not in lust, in comfort. That was worse. Anne's jealousy flooded her chest like smoke filling a sealed room. The king withdrew his hand too slowly. Anne's nails dug crescents into her palms as she forced a calm voice. "Your Majesty, the Queen has arrived." Henry's face hardened as if love were a debt he wished she would stop collecting. Back in her chamber, Anne sat before a mirror and studied the woman who had changed a kingdom. Eyes once defiant, now glimmered with panic. Skin once radiant, now thinning beneath stress. She reached for her French hood, straightening pearls like a soldier sharpening weapons. "Beauty is my duty," she whispered, "but duty does not protect you from the blade." As nights grew quieter, Henry's footsteps stopped coming to her bed. The royal mattress grew cold beside her. She lay awake, staring at the carved canopy, tracing the patterns that looked like vines, slowly choking the wood. Sometimes she reached out across the empty sheets to the ghost of the man who once swore he would die for her. Now she feared he might kill her, and continued to try. She read scripture aloud to prove her godliness. She kissed Henry's hand with obedient grace. She attempted charm where power had once been enough. But desperation is not attractive. Her laughter began to crack at the edges. Her anger became too sharp for silk. The king recoiled, not from hatred, from disappointment. One morning, as sunlight filtered through stained glass, a servant girl slipped while pouring wine. The goblet shattered. A splash of red spread across the floor like fresh blood. Anne slapped the girl hard. The girl fell to her knees, tears streaming. The court gasped, not for the servant, but at what the queen had revealed. Fear. Fear is the one perfume no monarch wants to wear, and the court could smell it clearly. Rumors intensified. She cannot bear sons. She has cursed the king. She sleeps with others to produce heirs. She regrets destroying Catherine. She deserves what's coming. Anne walked through the palace as though walking through a minefield of poisonous words, each syllable a matchstick near a barrel of gunpowder. No place was safe, not even her prayers. One night, she returned to the chapel where she first begged heaven to choose her. The candles flickered violently, as if rejecting her presence. The scent of melting wax clung to her skin, thick and suffocating. She knelt, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. "Please," she whispered into the void, "give me a son. Give me my husband back." But silence is sometimes the loudest refusal. Henry entered quietly, his boots echoing like a verdict. She turned, hope flickering in her chest, but his eyes were somewhere far away. "I need peace." "Then," he said. His voice was a locked door. She tried to reach him, but he had already disappeared into the idea of another future, one without her. She felt the ground shift beneath her knees. Her crown tightened around her skull like a serpent made of gold. Anne Boleyn, once England's brightest fire, was now burning herself alive, trying to stay warm. Love had not saved. Her it had made her too visible to kill, quietly. So the world sharpened truth into daggers of speculation. And she understood. What everyone else already knew, her crown was slipping. Her enemies were smiling, her husband was waiting. The drums of destiny were beating faster. But Anne did not bow. She lifted her chin. She wiped her tears. She stood as queens do, even when the throne has begun to rot beneath them, because above all else, she believed she could still win him back. She believed love could still save her. She had no idea that love had already chosen her execution date. A queen's heartbeat is measured not in love but in heirs, and Anne's heartbeat was running out. Winter wind howled through palace corridors, sharp as whispered judgment. Anne wrapped her cloak tighter, but the cold slipped beneath the velvet like fear beneath bone. Her fingers shook as she pressed them to her stomach. A flutter of life answered, a spark of hope in a kingdom built on disappointment. If she could give Henry a son, just one, the nightmare would rewind. The crown would cling instead of slipping. She whispered to the unborn child, "You will save me, but destiny does not bargain." Arrived without warning, a loud crack, a book dropped by accident or a door slammed too hard, startled her. Pain exploded within. She screamed as her body trembled beneath the weight of fate. Blood like a royal seal broken stained the chamber floor. The baby, her salvation, gone. Midwives whispered prayers as Anne sobbed into sheets already turning crimson. The room smelled of iron and endings. Henry arrived, face carved from stone. Anne lifted trembling hands toward the man who once promised eternity. His voice struck before she could speak. "You have no honor. Anne, you have meddled in affairs you do not understand." She blinked, confused until she realized he blamed her. He believed the miscarriage a punishment for her? Witchcraft and jealousy. She reached for him. He stepped back. The space between them became a grave. At court dinners now, Henry sat beside Jane Seymour, the woman who worshipped silence. Jane's pale hands folded neatly like closed wings. Anne watched desperation squeeze her chest until breathing hurt. Torchlight flickered across the hall, casting Henry's shadow toward Jane instead of his queen. Every glance was a cut, every smile a betrayal. Servants bowed to Jane with growing obedience. They knew where the wind was blowing. They knew a crown would soon change heads. One freezing dusk, Anne found Jane in the gallery, accepting a locket from Henry. A gold heart split open to reveal his face inside. Anne seized Jane's wrist hard enough to bruise. The locket snapped shut like a trap. Jane gasped, fear widening her eyes. Anne's voice was a blade dipped in tears. "He is mine." Jane's whisper was a victory. Not anymore. Anne released her, regret slicing deeper than anger ever could. That night, Henry accused Anne of treasonous behavior, not for violence, for jealousy. Enemies gathered like wolves sensing weakness. Thomas Cromwell, once Anne's fiercest ally, now plotted silently to survive her fall. He fed the king poisonous stories. Anne loves others. Anne laughs at you. Anne conspires with courtiers. Anne is dangerous. Henry swallowed every lie as if craving the taste of betrayal in his mouth. His love became suspicion. His suspicion became fear, and fear becomes law when worn by a king. Rumors sharpened. She bewitched him. She controlled his mind. She bewitched his fate. Every miscarriage became evidence of a curse. Every tear became proof she hid a monster's heart. Cromwell whispered, "She sleeps with her brother." Henry's silence was permission for the nightmare to proceed. Anne sat alone in her chamber, watching the fireplace die. No footsteps approached. No kisses goodnight. Only dread. She clutched the bee necklace at her throat, once a symbol of confidence, now choking. "I gave everything," she whispered. The last ember flickered back. "Why isn't it enough?" No one answered. The palace had already decided. The next morning, as Anne stepped into the sunlight, a raven landed on the windowsill. Its black feathers absorbed all brightness. Its eyes reflected her fear. It cawed once, a cry like a warning or a prophecy. Anne flinched. Her maid crossed herself and stared at the omen. That afternoon, Anne was summoned. Henry did not greet her. He did not touch her. He did not meet her eyes. "I have been warned," he said, voice hollow. "Warned? Of what?" Her voice cracked. "That you have betrayed me." Her knees weakened as if the earth betrayed her legs. "I would never." She rushed forward. Guards stepped between them. Henry turned away. Again. The echo of his boots down the corridor sounded like a closing tomb. Anne was left with a single realization. He wanted her gone, not misunderstood. Not forgiven, gone. Her trembling hand brushed her belly. No life there to shield her. No son to bargain with. She felt like a candle burning through its final drop of wax. The flame danced desperately before darkness. Once, she had promised Henry a future only she could deliver. Now, every second pushed her further toward an ending she could not escape. She staggered to the window overlooking the Thames. Wind slapped her cheeks cold as truth. Her reflection in the glass was a stranger. Eyes darkened with loss, jaw clenched in defiance. Crown sitting crooked like fate mocking her. "I can fight," she whispered to the river, But the river does not argue, it only flows. From that night forward, the palace changed. Doors slammed when she approached. Conversation stopped when she passed. Guards stood closer. Freedom shrank. Breaths grew shorter. Anne Boleyn could feel death before she saw it. It lingered in the corners. A polite executioner waiting for permission to bow. And somewhere behind every locked door, a quill-scratched parchment, writing the false crimes that would sentence. Her the game was ending, and she was already checkmated. The Tower of London was built to protect England. Tonight, it would destroy its queen. Anne Boleyn stood in the center of the great hall, fingers pressed together to keep them from shaking. Servants and nobles circled her like vultures, waiting for the eyelids of the dying to close. Thomas Cromwell, once her ally, now studied her with a cold hunger. He bowed slightly, but his voice tasted of poison. "The king has questions for you, Majesty." No title had ever sounded more like mockery. Her arrest came not with swords, but with words sharpened into weapons. Adultery, treason, incest, accusations so grotesque the hall gasped, not because they believed them, but because they wanted to. The charges were read aloud as if each syllable peeled away a layer of her dignity. They accused her of seducing 5 men, including her own brother. Anne's breath caught like silk caught on a hook. "My brother?" she whispered. "How dare you?" Cromwell's eyes glittered. "We dare because the king commands it." Her crown was ripped from her head like a scab torn from a fresh wound. Guards seized her arms. Silk tore under rough hands. She stumbled, but held her chin high. Queens do not collapse. Even when dragged, the tower awaited. The portcullis groaned as it lifted. A beast opening its jaws, cold air slapped her skin as she crossed the threshold where light ends and history devours the living. The smell of damp stone and rusted iron filled her lungs. The walls whispered, "Are you at home now?" Inside her cell, a single torch flickered, a dying star in an endless night. Anne pressed her palm to the cold stone. It pulsed back with centuries of suffering grafted into its veins. In that silence, she could hear water drip like seconds being stolen. Footsteps echoed upstairs. Guards pacing like impatient angels of death. She sat, wrapping arms around herself not for warmth, but to keep from coming apart. She thought of Henry, his laugh, his promises, his hands once trembling to hold her. Now those same hands signed her death sentence without shaking. Love does not turn into hate. It reveals the hate that always lived beneath. When the cell door opened, candles formed an aisle of fire. They brought her to a courtroom of men who already judged her guilty. Anne kept her gaze forward. Accusers spoke as if she were not alive to hear them. They described her as a serpent who seduced England into sin. They painted her womb as a tomb where heirs went to die. They claimed she used dark magic to ruin the king's virility. Anne almost laughed, a bitter, choking laugh that never reached her lips. Men fear what they cannot control, and Henry could no longer control his disappointment. Her brother George was dragged into the same trial. He looked at Anne, not with fear, but with an apology. He bowed his head as they condemned him for a crime too vile to speak aloud without trembling. Anne tried to run to him. Guards forced her back. George's eyes were the last tenderness left in the world, and she watched as they tore him away. Their screams met somewhere between their hearts. Siblings, born together to die apart. Night swallowed her again. In the tower, she lay in the darkness and listened to her own breathing. Every inhale a plea, every exhale a question. Why? A question with too many answers, because kings cannot be wrong, because power is afraid of tomorrow, because men rewrite truth when truth threatens their comfort, because she failed to produce what only God can give, because Henry needed someone to blame. The next morning, the Archbishop came. He wore robes that once blessed her marriage. Now they prepared to erase it. Your Marriage to His Majesty is declared invalid, he informed. Her like a banker denying a loan. Anne stared. Invalid? So she had never been queen. Never been wife, only mistress. Only mistake. Her throat tightened. They hadn't just stolen her future, they stole her past. From the courtyard outside, she heard a sickening sound, a blade striking bone, a cry cut short. Her brother. Her heart imploded in one silent beat. Her nails dug into her palms until they bled. One life left to take hers. She wiped her tears as if polishing. Steel, if they wanted her gone. She would leave with dignity they could not touch. She whispered to the dead man she could not save, I will not scream, George. I will look them in the eyes. Guards entered, helmets gleaming like the sun, mocking her. The executioner has been summoned, they said. Anne asked quietly, will it be the sword? The guard nodded. She almost smiled. The sword, quick, clean, it was an act of mercy, mercy Henry granted. Her only because she once made him feel like a god. She stood, her knees did not buckle. Her voice did not crack, her soul did. Not ask for permission to be brave, because bravery is not loud. It is a whisper. I remain. As they led her toward the scaffold, she inhaled the scent of morning dew, the sweetness of blooming gardens, the warmth of sun she would never feel again. All the simple joys she once overlooked felt like gold slipping through fingers. Torch flames swayed as she passed. As if bowing, even the tower ravens grew silent. History was holding its breath. Anne. Boleyn was no longer a queen, but she still knew how to walk like one. Her steps were a final dance, her heart a final drum, her story already a ghost hovering above her shadow. She had one night left. One night to make peace with a world that punished her for daring to want to. Much one night before the blade kissed her neck. Night fell upon London like a curtain drawn over a final act. Inside the tower, Anne Boleyn sat alone, a candle flickering by her side, its flame fragile as her remaining breaths. Her fingers traced the wooden table, feeling grooves carved by past prisoners, men who begged for the mercy she would soon refuse. Anne inhaled slowly. The room smelled of damp stone, old prayers, and endings. A raven croaked outside as if reading her eulogy early. She asked for her music master to play her favorite hymn one last time. But the tower does not offer comfort. Instead, a distant church bell tolled 12 times, her final midnight. She knelt beside the bed and prayed with a heart both punished and proud. For my daughter, she whispered. For Elizabeth, the child who would never watch her dance, never braid her hair, never know her mother's laugh outside memory. Anne clutched the bee necklace so tightly it left a mark against her skin. I die. But she will rise, her voice, a prophecy wrapped in sorrow. The door creaked open. A guard entered with a tray of wine and bread. Anne smiled gently. Wine for the condemned? How thoughtful. He avoided her gaze. Even executioners fear meeting eyes that history will never forget. She sipped the wine. Its sweetness tasted like a lie the world wanted her to swallow. She set the cup down, hands steady. If Henry wished to see her break, he would die disappointed. Before dawn, Sir William Kingston, the lieutenant of the Tower, came to deliver news. The executioner has arrived from Calais. Anne exhaled. A swordsman, swift, skilled. Not the clumsy axe that could take several hits. A gift from the man who took everything else. How kind of His Majesty, Anne said softly, bitterness glinting like broken glass. Kingston bowed, but grief clouded his eyes. He admired her courage. The world would try to bury that courage with her head. The sun rose slowly, painting the Thames silver, as if the river itself was placing coins on her eyelids. Anne stepped into the courtyard. Cold air bit her cheeks. A final kiss of winter against a woman born from summer's fire. Crowds gathered along the walls. Some wept. Some smirked. All watched, history's cruelest audience. She climbed the wooden steps to the scaffold, each plank groaning as if warning her to turn back. But queens do not turn back. The executioner bowed to her, his sword hidden behind his back to calm her. Fear. Anne knelt on the straw-covered boards, her gown brushed the ground like falling petals. Wind tugged at her black French hood. Torchlight flickered. Silence demanded respect. Then Anne Boleyn spoke, and her voice was the sound of dignity. "Refusing to die, good Christian people," she began. "I am come hither to die according to the law." Her hands trembled, but she hid them beneath her skirt. "And thus I will speak nothing against the king, my lord and husband." She swallowed. "I pray God save him and send him long to reign over you." She blinked away tears before they could fall. "For to me, he was ever good and gentle, a lie to grant her grace." The crowd did not breathe. Her final words were for heaven. "To Jesus Christ I commend my soul." She removed her necklace and handed it gently to her ladies, a symbol of identity she no longer needed. She tucked her hair beneath her hood so the blade would not hesitate. Her ladies sobbed softly, hands clasped in helpless prayer. Anne smiled at them, a mother's smile wrapped around a queen's steel. "Do not weep," she murmured, "for this is only a moment. This is only a moment." As if she believed she would awaken somewhere kinder. The executioner stepped behind her, quiet as a ghost. He whispered to his assistant, "Bring me my sword." Anne turned her eyes toward the sky. Clouds shifted, as if making room for her arrival. The executioner called out loudly, "Where is my sword?" Anne glanced sideways, instinctively turning her head, and in that fraction of distraction, the blade sang a swift silver arc, a kiss of steel, a mercy she earned with courage. Her body fell soft as surrendered silk. Her head rolled into straw like a dropped crown. Blood glistened like scattered rubies. A raven shrieked. Wind carried her final warmth into the air. The Sadi crowd exhaled all at once like a beast, relieved. Rumors say her lips moved for several seconds after. Separation, as if even death had to wrestle her voice into silence. History remembers her last breath not as fear, but as defiance. Her ladies wrapped her. Remains in a crude linen cloth, no coffin. No ceremony. Queens deserve marble tombs. Traitors get earth. But Anne Boleyn was neither traitor nor victim. She was a warning. Love that destroys nations can also destroy hearts. Power. Stolen is power loaned, and every debt comes due. As they carried her away, a single drop of blood slid across the scaffold, a line drawn between the world she changed and the world she left behind. It dried in silence. But silence remembers. Death did not silence Anne Boleyn. It made her louder. The morning after the execution, the tower ravens would not leave the scaffold. They pecked at the straw as though searching for the last trace of her heartbeat. The executioner wiped his sword once. Only once, then vanished into history with a weapon that had tasted too much royalty. But the court did not pause for grief. The crown never stops moving. Henry VIII wore black for barely a moment. Then he smiled, he laughed, he celebrated. The people whispered the truth no one dared speak. The king had killed his wife in order to marry his mistress, and he wasted no time. Jane Seymour became queen 11 days after Anne's death. Love that destroys a kingdom cannot wait to replace itself. Anne's ladies, still wearing clothes stained with her tears, were ordered to attend Jane. Their hands shook as they placed jewels once warmed by Anne's skin onto the woman who replaced her. Jealousy no longer lived in Anne's heart. It lived in theirs. Late at night, the tower guards began reporting a disturbing sound. Tap, tap, tap. The same sound heard beneath earth when Anne's brother was killed. They swore they heard footsteps tracing the same path Anne walked to her death. Light footsteps, almost like a dance. The guards crossed themselves. Sins this large do not sleep. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Anne's daughter slept in a quiet room far from the palace, a cradle without a crown. Henry refused to acknowledge her fully, a bastard in his own eyes because her mother had displeased him. But when the little girl tilted her head a certain way, her dark eyes gleaming with wit, everyone saw it. Anne lived in Elizabeth's gaze, and that terrified them. One evening, a storm crashed against Whitehall. Lightning exposed the castle's silhouettes, sharp as knives. Thunder rolled like drums announcing judgment. Henry paced his chamber, the floor creaking beneath his weight. Each crack of thunder sounded like a blade falling again. Jane slept with innocent breaths. But Henry, he felt a presence, a whisper, a familiar perfume. The scent of damask roses Anne always wore. He spun no one, yet the air still held her. He pressed a hand to his chest as pressure tightened. A phantom grip from a woman he silenced. Henry hurried to the chapel, falling to his knees. "Deliver me from her," he begged. The crucifix above him hung silently. Even Christ refused to defend him. Court rumors spread faster than fire. The Queen's ghost walks. She scratches at the tower walls. She demands her head be returned. Those who mocked Anne began to avoid mirrors, fearing her reflection would stare back. Even King. Henry avoided looking into still water. Monarchs may destroy bodies, but spirits remain undefeated. Yet the most powerful haunting was not supernatural. It was political. Elizabeth grew. With every year, her mind sharpened. Her voice gained power. She absorbed knowledge like breath. Be quick. Quiet, unstoppable, people noticed. She had her mother's fire, her mother's charm, her mother's hunger. Anne had died for a son, but a daughter would avenge her. Years passed like a tightening knot. Henry remarried, and remarried, and remarried. But every marriage ended in grief, death, divorce, misery. Some whispered Anne had cursed him, that Henry would never again find happiness in a wife, that every woman who wore a crown after her would feel its sharp teeth. Even in the royal nursery, nurses told stories. Do not lie. Do not betray, or Queen Anne will come for you. Children shivered under blankets, but they remembered her name. Anne Boleyn became legend decades later. After kings died and kingdoms changed shape, Elizabeth ascended the throne. Crowds roared like a nation reborn. Elizabeth stood in royal splendor, gowned in gold, crown heavy with destiny. She raised her chin, the same way Anne did before the sword. In that moment, the world remembered. The daughter of the mother they tried to erase now ruled the empire. England's greatest monarch came from the womb they condemned. Anne had won. In Whitehall Palace, where Anne once begged for love, Elizabeth placed her mother's bee necklace around her own throat, a silent vow. History cannot bury the truth. She walked past the tower, past the place where Anne died, and ravens lined the walls as if bowing. Her footsteps were her mother's footsteps. Finally finishing the dance, the blade had not ended the story, it had sharpened it. On quiet nights, when the moon glows pale and the Thames whispers against the stones, some say you can still hear soft tapping from the tower floor, a queen reminding the world, I am still here. And the world whispers back, we remember. Tonight, we watched a crown fall. We walked beside a queen who learned too late that love from a king can be sharper than any sword. Anne Boleyn's footsteps echoed through palaces and prisons, and finally, into eternity. But not all endings are erased by the wind. Some linger, some whisper, some rise again in the breath of a child who inherits the dream her mother died. For Elizabeth took the throne that was built on Anne's memory, on Anne's courage, on Anne's refusal to kneel even when her world collapsed. Close your eyes. Feel the quiet settle around you like soft velvet hanging from cathedral rafters. Warm candlelight, slow heartbeat, a hush that promises rest. History is loud, but night makes it gentle. Anne's story, wood, stone, blood, and one final vow, now floats like a swan upon the still waters of the Thames. If she wanders anywhere now, It is not in sorrow, it is in legacy. She loved, she suffered. She gave England a queen who changed the world. The ravens go still, the crown grows calm. The darkness is no longer a threat. It is only a blanket. You can rest now too. Let the past tuck itself away. Let silence hold you softly. Tomorrow, another story will rise. But for now, sleep deep. Good night.